So there are 4 questions which essentially cover the same territory. So I'm just going to summarise that by saying what those questions are about is that residents are asking whether Oakville can be rezoned to allow for residential subdivision to offset rating increases and the impact of the M9 outer orbital. So I'll ask Andy to come up and answer that question.
Thank you, Joseph. So basically it's the Department of Planning and Environment who actually rezone land. Vineyard Stage 1 within the Northwest Growth Area has recently been rezoned by the Department of Planning and Environment and provides for approximately 2,500 new dwellings. Further investigation by the Department of Planning and Environment within the Northwest Growth Area has been on hold for planning associated with the Outer Sydney Orbital to be finalised. Following a council resolution to review the Hawkesbury residential land strategy, work has commenced in terms of various studies associated with urban and rural lands. There is a wide range of matters to be considered on an LGA-wide basis as part of that process, including, for example, flooding, rural lands, bushfire, environmental and biodiversity matters, traffic and transport, climate change and adaptation, existing urban infrastructure, recreation and open space, heritage, and diverse and affordable housing. The work being undertaken by Council in terms of those urban and rural land studies will assist Council as a stakeholder when the process of further investigation by the Department of Planning and Environment within the Northwest Growth Area recommences.
So are there any follow-up questions for Andrew?
As I say, it's the department. Basically, the answer is no. It's the Department of Planning and Environment who actually rezones land. So, Council's going through a process. Yeah. So basically, Council can't. It's the Department of Planning and Environment who actually rezones land. Council's undertaking a number of studies that will help inform the process for when the further investigations by the Department of Planning and Environment occur within the Northwest Growth Area. So, short answer is no. Yeah.
Do you have a question? The Department of Planning and Environment didn't approve the Gables. It was the Hills Council.
As I say, so there's a resolution from Council to review our residential land strategy, and that's why we're undertaking those various studies.
You said you couldn't do it, but the Hills can do it. So like how come
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's the Department of Planning and Environment who actually rezones the land.
So there's no one-size-fits-all across metropolitan Sydney. In relation to the Northwest Growth Sector, the Department of Planning, New South Wales Department of Planning, are the relevant planning authority. We don't make that rule, the government make that rule. That rule's been in place for 10 years and they've been working their way through all the rezonings. So at the moment, they've determined to release Vineyard Stage 1. That's the press release from the Department of Planning. It's Stage 1 and it's limited to the current area, and we've actually got, I think, a graphic that shows that current area. Okay, so you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, there's an area that's coloured purple, and above it there's an area that's coloured that's sort of a browny colour. That's Vineyard Stage 1, and that's the limit of the land that's been rezoned by the Department of Planning. And they're not going to consider any further rezonings until that corridor, the currently proposed M9 outer orbital corridor, until that's finalised. Now, again, that's a state government corridor. It's not a council corridor. We don't make the rules. We made a submission in relation to the corridor, and as Andrew said, we're doing a lot of work on our urban and rural strategy so that when the state government come to consider Vineyard Stage 2, whatever that is, we've got our position clearly worked out. We'll know what we're going to argue for in terms of heritage and environment and transport and housing and whatever else. But we'll be just like everyone else in the room here, we'll be making a submission. We are not the planning authority. There are parts of the metropolitan area where the council is the planning authority, and the Hills Shire is the planning authority for some sections of their local government area. So that's just the situation. Andrew's explanation is quite accurate. It's unfortunate that that's the case. We would like to be the planning authority, but we're not. We are a planning authority for other matters in other areas, but not in this location. And as I said, that's been the situation for over 10 years. I'm happy to take any follow-up questions. Yep.
So are you saying that council basically has no influence over what the Department of Planning do in terms of rezoning, or what sort of influence, and as a community, like as stakeholders within the community, what sort of consultation will we be able to be involved in with council in this process?
We certainly don't have the level of influence that I would like. So, for example, when this area was rezoned, there was no Section 94 plan in place, no development control plan in place, and we're still playing catch up on the Section 94 plan. Now, a Section 94 plan is an incredibly important document because what it does, it allows council to levy developers contributions on a per lot basis, and those contributions go towards funding roads and drainage and community facilities and things like that. We don't have that Section 94 plan. That should have been in place when the land was rezoned, and it wasn't, despite our arguments. So we don't have the influence that we would like. We would like to be more involved, and we continue to argue to be more involved. We've got a meeting coming up with the Department of Planning staff to, again, express our frustration with this process to date and to argue for more involvement. Now, part of that will be, again, engaging with the community. The local community has to be involved in the planning so that as we move forward, people know what's going on.
Shame our local member can't get out of beef right, isn't it?
Are there any other questions? Yep.
I think we all struggle with the haphazard way that they roll these developments and roads out, so that you have, like, you're going to have 45 different goes at expanding down the road, because you do a little bit of one developer and then a little bit of another developer, and it's just not logical. Why can't there be some control to say it's all going to be zoned, start at one end, and the council works with the developers to release it and a logical development of the roads? Because we're jack of 40 kilometres moving from this 100 yards to that 100 yards. And
Okay, so the situation in Australia is that's not the sort of country we are. So we have processes that give people rights to do things and not do things. So it's not a situation where the land is rezoned and you're told by this date you've got to redevelop your land or not. As an owner of land, it's up to you when you want to develop your land. So there would be people here at the moment that would be living in this area right now, and they've got the opportunity to stay there for as long as they like. And there are plenty of examples around metropolitan Sydney where whole subdivisions have been created and there are still blocks in the middle where people are staying because they choose to live there. That's where they want to live. And that's the system. There's no compulsory development in this country.
So on Boundary Road, why have they blocked off someone's driveway opposite the subdivision? The house is actually in Hawkesbury Council, and they're moving the driveway further down the road, and it's on the wrong side of the subdivision. Why have they got curb and gutter, footpath, and moved their driveway?
So
they're not forced to subdivide or to reconfigure the land.
So Boundary Road is exactly that. It's the boundary between the Hills Shire and Hawkesbury City Council. And again, the Section 94 plan that I referred to earlier is the tool for funding those road upgrades. And they happen as and where development occurs. And sometimes you have interim solutions. So again, it's not uncommon for land to be developed and to have a temporary access until the long-term road structure is delivered.
Very
and
expensive temporary access.
It's the developer's judgment as to whether they think it's worth their while to do that or not. And it's not unusual to have temporary vehicle access, to have temporary retarding basins. These are all things that happen
It's not temporary.
throughout.
It's temporary. You're not thinking the same place.
So, as Joseph said at the beginning, I'm going to try and answer the question. Then when you've got a follow-up question, by all means, give me your follow-up question. But I'd like to, for the benefit of everyone else, just finish what I'm saying. So, developers make those decisions based on the economies of their subdivision. And that's the decision. And as I said, it's a temporary situation sometimes. It's also a boundary road. So there are different issues that apply in this situation because you've got two local government authorities with development occurring on either side or not occurring. And it is an unusual situation, boundary road. It's not something that happens everywhere, every day.
What I'm saying is they're actually changing Hawkesbury side of the road. It's not just happening on Hawkesbury. You're saying that we don't get forced into that thing. That looks like it's being forced.
So,
They put a curb cut, they put a retaining wall, they block off their access, or are going to block off their access to the road and move their driveway down the road. It's probably spent, I'd say, in excess of $100,000 to build a new driveway, new gates, electric
Yep.
gates. 250,000, someone else is saying. That's not a temporary access.
So again, that may be a requirement of the Roads and Maritime Services, where they say, if you want this subdivision to occur now, you have to pay for some upgrading of Boundary Road. And this is the final design of Boundary Road, so construct it to that standard. There are all sorts of variations on this, and there are all sorts of government agencies involved, and, you know, it is what it is sometimes. Yes?
On that regard, is there anything that we can do, and who do we need to put pressure on, or who do we need to have our voices heard by in order to get Boundary Road hooked up to a degree that's going to make our life easier for the next 5 to 10 years?
So the question is, what opportunities are there for residents to try and influence how and when Boundary Road is upgraded so that there's not just ongoing works for the next 10 years. I'm happy to take that on board on behalf of the group. We've got everyone's emails and we can make representations to Roads and Maritime Services and to Hillshire, just outlining that residents are frustrated with the current arrangement and is there some way of speeding things up. I can't give you an answer. We will have to speak to those parties. I don't dispute that. When we came out here last year, there were roadworks happening on Boundary Road. I'm not disputing that at all. Yes, down the front.
Peter, I was just going to ask you, you're saying that the Hawkesbury Council is looking to get some their input put into the Planning Authority department. What does your input entail? What is your vision for suburbs like Oakville? Do you wish to have it rezoned or not?
So we're still doing some of that research to work out exactly what our position is on Oakville and Maraylya and some of those areas. You've got Skyville National Park there. Now, if that's going to be retained as a national park, it's got very sensitive and rare Cumberland Plain woodland on it. If that's going to be retained, that woodland needs to be protected and nurtured. So there'll be a need for corridors to connect that into larger networks of vegetation. So that's just an example of one of the considerations. Another consideration is the stormwater management and how that's managed across the site, because we have to ensure that the final flow of stormwater off any development is the same as the pre-development rate, so that it needs to be detained within the subdivision and things like that. We're also keen to ensure that new housing is located close to public transport. So again, we want to see a concentration of development around railway stations and things like that. So that's some of the considerations, and they're the bones of some of the things that we're looking at the moment.
So therefore, for all the residents that are sitting there wondering what they're going to do in the next 5 years or 10 years of their life, we're going to be sitting here hearing this from the council. I mean, the national park obviously should be retained. The water issue, of course, has got to be looked at. But these are not new issues. They've been there for the last 100 years.
So I'll just...
How much longer do you have to look at it? You haven't given us a decision whether you're seeking any redevelopment in the Oakville area. Because the council misled us a couple of years ago. Oakville could have gone with the Hills Council. We'd be rezoned and we'd all be millionaires somewhere else now. But you're not saying anything that we don't know.
Okay, so the question is, what's council doing, that sort of thing.
Council's plan for April.
Yeah, as I said, we're not the planning authority, the Department of Planning are. Now, can I just finish? So, we've only just got this document in December last year, late December last year. And we've been waiting for the corridor decision as well, because there's no use spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on all these plans and then to have the corridor move somewhere else. It's a waste of money. So we have to wait till some of these big positions are resolved. So we've got to start with the area that's already been rezoned. We've got a sense of what's being looked at there. But until the corridor is finalised, we can't finalise our position going forward. And I don't want to put forward a position tonight and then find that corridor move, 2 kilometres in a month's time, and then we find out, well, you told us this and you told us that. I'm telling you, it's a complex thing. We want to get development near public transport, so that's certainly something we want to do. But beyond that, we need to work out what the final position is with these corridors so that Andrew can finish the detailed planning that he's doing. Now, he's started, he's progressed it to a point, and we're just waiting for the decision on the corridors.
Apparently they're going to make an announcement tomorrow in the state government.
Well, I can't. I wouldn't have a clue.
Can I ask which plan you're talking about now we got in December for the high growth area?
So the question is, which plan did we get in December?
The last one, which I'm sure was more than you just.
So the question was, which plan did we get in December? That's the plan that we got in December. That area was rezoned in December last year. It's rezoning 95 existing lots into about 2,400 future lots, and it's called Vineyard Stage 1.
Surely council must have an inkling, without you putting your head on the chopping block, there's an inkling that an orbital is going to go in that direction. There's an inkling to all of us that we could lose our homes. There's a thought process going on with all of us that we don't know. We're not asking you to make a definite statement, but that corridor is pointing to a lot of people's lives. Now, someone, somewhere, must have an inkling that it is or isn't maybe going to happen. That's all we want to know.
And the question is, what's my inkling on the corridor?
Yes.
I don't have an inkling because...
But the development's there already, stage 1, that points to the fact that that corridor is part of why the corridor is there.
Not necessarily. So I've been working in planning for over 30 years and I've seen corridors move kilometres in the past.
So would that mean that the Vineyard Stage 1 will get aborted if the corridor gets moved?
No, Vineyard Stage 1 has already been announced. It's been gazetted and developers are approaching council to develop the Stage 1 area.
Okay, so then could I assume that that corridor is there because that development is close to a corridor?
No, that corridor was announced about 6 weeks ago. The road corridor was announced about 6 weeks ago. Vineyard, and it's not on Boundary Road. That's correct. And that's correct. And that's exactly my point, that corridors do change. So you've just confirmed the point I'm making, that things change, despite the fact that we have views. So that corridor is currently proposed, but until it's confirmed, there's no guarantee that's where it's going to be.
Peter, can I offer a suggestion? How does our residential land strategy interface with these large estate processes? Is the residential land strategy and the community consultation that we engage with that a way in which locals can collectively express their desires about the future of this area?
It's one way, Nathan. So it's Councillor Zambronio, so he's asking how does our work interact with this and perhaps assist residents. We're one stakeholder in the process, as I said earlier, and we certainly will have input into the process, but I can assure you that numbers mean far more than just one council. So the issue of the corridors is a far more sensitive issue now than it was 6 weeks ago because of the level of community interest. So I can't emphasise enough the need for the community to actively participate in the process and not rely on the council, because the council is just one voice and it is not necessarily a voice that's listened to all the time. Yes.
5 acres, we've got rural. Why, if we want to subdivide or look at the area going more lifestyle blocks of say 2 acres, 2.5 acres, does that have to go to planning?
Yes, it does. So the question is, someone on 5 acres, does it have to go to planning? If it's in the investigation area, yes, it does.
Can I just ask about the corridor itself? So obviously, I believe council's made a submission stating
Yes.
opposition to it. What other steps has council taken? Have there been meetings with various ministers and so forth about the proposed corridor?
So I'm going to just park that for 1 second, because there's quite a few questions about the corridor coming up. We're going to talk about council's submission at that point, so I will get to that, but I do want to finish this planning issue before we move on to the corridor specifically. Yes?
I think what a lot of the Oakville residents are worried about is, we've had our rates jacked up, and now we're worried about a corridor coming through. There's a lot of people here, including the younger generation, but the older generation, certainly, that they don't know where they're going with their lives, if they have to move, or if they're going to stay, or can we renovate because we don't want to spend the money because it's going to get developed in 5 years. I think people are just waiting for an answer, and it just seems like we seem to be going around and around circles all the time.
I appreciate the point you're making. So the corridors were first put out to consultation in 2015, and if I can, so the Roads and Maritime Services and Transport for New South Wales conducted a consultation process in 2015. I think. So can I just finish? So there are documents, and again we can make those available tomorrow. So if I can just finish, okay, you can interrogate me when I've finished. The state government went out to consultation in 2015. They had 2 corridors they were looking at. There was the outer orbital, and when you see the document, you'll see that it refers to a large coloured area that goes around the perimeter of Sydney. And they were seeking input into that alignment of that corridor. And there was another, again, coloured area that went off up towards Kurrajong from the M7. Those documents went out on exhibition. They're on the website. You'll be able to go and look at them when you get home if you want to, or we'll put a link to them on our website. You can see that the consultation process did start in 2015. So, well, I'm not saying that you did know. I'm just telling you this is what the situation is. And the point I'm making is that these things take time. So that started in 2015. These corridors were released in 2018. We don't have a timeline for when they're going to be finalised, and we're waiting for that so that we can again proceed to the next stage of the planning process. And again, it's all out of our control. We've made submissions. We've suggested a way forward to the government. We're happy to share that with you later on, but we're not in the driving seat on this, unfortunately. We are only trying to influence the outcome.
If it started in 2015, when did you make the submission?
The community generally were consulted in 2015, where there were meetings, where people were asked their opinions. And again, I'll put a link to all that information on the webpage so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about.
When did you make a submission?
We didn't make a submission in 2015.
Is it fair enough to say that in 2015 the proposed corridor
No, not really.
It was abandoned road corridor, because a lot of the corridor was on the other side of Bounce Road.
It was a very smudgy, cloudy area. There was no definite position. It was a discussion point, not a corridor that was up for consultation. And the information that's on the website advises that the community were consulted, they were asked for their input, and that's informed the current corridor. That's what's on the website. Happy to put the link up and happy for people to contest that written history with Transport for New South Wales. Yes?
You talked about community consultations. I'm just wondering why you're not consulting with Oakville. You're having Headtown, Maraylya, Courage on various meetings. Why is the council not consulting with Oakville?
So we're doing these town meetings right across the local government area. So we've been to Colo, we've been to Kurrajong. We haven't, for example, been to some of the other areas to the west of the river. So we haven't been to Wilberforce, for example. We went to North Richmond, but we didn't go to Richmond. We went to Windsor. We're here. We've been at Pitt Town. We've come here again tonight because we were here 12 months ago. We got a really big turnout, and we wanted to come back here again for that reason.
What I asked you was, why are you not consulting with Oakville?
We're consulting over the whole local government area. People can come to whichever meeting they want to come to. There's no restriction. We've had people at North Richmond who came from McGrath's Hill. People come from all over the place if the time or the day suits them. And we're happy. We'll be back here again next year. I can assure you of that. So maybe next year we'll do Oakville and we won't do Maraylya. We'll take that on board. Yes.
I noticed that you all got a glossy little booklet tonight, and I can't see Maraylya mentioned here.
So that's going to be stage 2. So we're going through the questions.
But this is what you've done the last 12 months and what you're doing the next 12 months. That's my understanding of it. Is that the way that we read it?
So we're happy to come.
What we've done and what we're doing, and Maraylya is not mentioned once, which kind of, when we look at this plan, as residents, we go, well, that doesn't fill us with much confidence at all.
Okay, so we'll take that on board, but we're dealing with the planning issue at the moment, and we'll come to that as a later date. So just keep that question and we'll come to that, okay? We're trying to keep some structure around this to get through everything. Any more questions on planning before we move on to the orbital? So move on to the orbital. Okay, so council. Oh, right, sorry, Joseph, you should. No, go.
So we've got a number of questions about the orbital and its impact on Oakville, Maraylya, Skyville, and on your rural lifestyles and on land values. So we've tried to summarise the questions in 2 parts. What is Council doing on behalf of the community to raise the community's concern regarding the impact of the M9 outer orbital on Oakville and on our rural lifestyles, and how does the M9 fit in with Council's long-term vision for Oakville, Maraylya, which we touched on earlier? And there's a second part to that question, which is, as the M9 will negatively affect property values, is Council intending to lower the rates for Oakville residents?
Okay, so look, Council considered a report in relation to the orbital last week, and as a consequence of that, they've sent a submission off to the state government. I'm just going to highlight some of the more relevant sections of that submission. It's about 4 or 5 pages in length, but the submission reads, the Council resolved to lodge a submission strenuously opposing the proposed Transport for New South Wales corridors, highlighting the state government's highlighting that the state government's corridor proposal is flawed, highlighting the state government's failure to prioritise immediate local traffic solutions, and then moving on to things such as the negative impacts of the proposed corridors on the local community. In particular, their impacts in relation to the local economy and agricultural productivity, impacts on the well-being and mental health of residents, impacts on incompatibility with council's strategic directions, and then particular opposition to the Outer Sydney Freight and Orbital Corridor for the following reasons. The location of the Outer City Freight and Orbital Corridor within highly sensitive areas comprising hundreds of established properties that are also noted for their environmental qualities, including critically endangered Cumberland Plain woodland, heritage values such as the Skyville National Park and its heritage listing, the agricultural production of the area, and the established residential areas of Bligh Park and South Windsor, and the future residential area of Vineyard. The design and location of the Outer Sydney Freight and Orbital Corridor terminating at Maraylya without providing any information about freight, trade or transport matters that are critical to determining its future role and function, and as a consequence its preferred alignment, in particular in relation to its connection to the Central Coast and the Hunter. The inadequacy of the community consultation throughout the process, including continued incorrect references to Box Hill and the inappropriate level of transparency adopted in relation to the development and release of the proposed corridor. The lack of detail and information provided to affected landowners regarding their rights and obligations as a result of the proposed corridor on matters such as the status of recent approvals, future development rights, landlocked blocks and insurance matters, etc. The lack of detailed investigations and supporting documentation in relation to matters such as flooding and evacuation, potential traffic impacts, potential noise and air pollution impacts on nearby sensitive land, including dwellings, schools, wildlife habitat and Aboriginal heritage. The need for the New South Wales Government to review the current corridor, and in doing so, generally work with the community from the bottom up, not top down, to document the objectives of the future transport needs, identify transport, social, flood, environmental and other issues, develop options that respond to the community developed objectives and issues, and engage in broad and inclusive consultation with the community in the identification of any preferred final transport options. It then also goes on to to deal with some matters about the lack of information provided in relation to landscaping and visual amenity and the general acquisition process and people's rights and obligations, and it concluded by attaching some copies of community developed submissions just to highlight to Transport for the New South Wales that these submissions existed and that they were worthy of more detailed consideration. So that was the nature of the submission that Council made to the State Government, Transport for New South Wales, and we are awaiting a response to that submission. Any questions on the submission? Yep.
Are you expecting to get a response from Transport for New South Wales?
We will get a response. Yep, we will get a response. Yes.
Did you propose an alternate route?
No, we didn't. So the question was, did we propose an alternate route? No, we didn't. We wanted them to do more work on exactly what was going to be the role fulfilled by the freight and road corridor. Until you know that role, it's very difficult to determine where that route should be. But if that freight corridor is going to be an important freight link between, say, Newcastle, Badgerys Creek Airport and Wollongong, that's a different sort of route than if it's just a corridor to the Central Coast. So we want to know that, and we also want to know how this corridor sits in the context of the Inland Rail corridor. So at the moment, the Commonwealth Government are building Inland Rail from Brisbane to Melbourne, which goes through central New South Wales. And again, that's going to have an impact on freight and trade, because that will put central New South Wales a day away from the ports of Brisbane and Melbourne. So these things are all important elements in any overall study, and we want some of those questions answered so that we can determine what's the role of this route, and then that will help us determine what's the appropriate location for that corridor.
Can I just add that so 3 years down the track the state government is, and if you're thinking that they clearly communicated what the role of the corridor is, and knowing that they want to, from the published documents that were circulated with community consultation, and again tonight on Channel 9 News, the state political reporter was saying that the government is pushing for finalisation of that route by the end of this year. So if their objective is to finalise things by the end of the year, but after 3 years they're not clear on what the role is, or at least to the council's way of thinking, well, what chance do you think there is that they're going to prioritise clarifying the role of the route versus getting it locked away?
Yep, so the question is, the government, it's reported, our intent on finalising the corridors by the end of the year. Council's asking for clarity about the role of the route. What's the chance of that influencing the outcome? Possibly not significant, unless there's a broad, groundswell of community interest, and then that may become something that would be considered.
Okay.
Yes.
I wrote to the Premier's office and regarding the issue of the orbitals, and they wrote back to me and said that the Transport New South Wales, that they'd been in touch with them and that they would be in touch with me in the next day or so, and I've been waiting 3 weeks now. And there's a lot of other people in that boat, and I'm just wondering if they're going to do the same thing to council.
Look, I do know that the number of submissions they've received is quite extraordinary, and again, I do think that they will get in contact with you, but again, if people are in that position where they've had some interaction, they're still waiting to be contacted, can you just wait back at the end, let us know, we'll put a mark next to your contact details on our list, and we can pass those on to Transport for New South Wales. There's no problem with us doing that, and suggest that they need to make contact ASAP. So there's no problem. So if everyone can just stay back, we'll look after that. Yes?
The second part of the question where it's saying what's likely to happen with rates. Now, my understanding is there's a process if the government gazette the corridor, then they have to do some sort of revaluation within a certain amount of time. So if the corridor is going to negatively impact on property values, how soon will they send somebody out to do the revaluation, and how soon can overall residents maybe anticipate some sort of rate relief?
So that's a really good question. So once the corridor is finalised, there is some, I think, basis for people to ask for a revaluation. There's no doubt about that. But that will have to wait until a decision is made on this corridor. Now, there are two decisions. The government may say, well, there are three decisions actually. The government may say, we're sticking with this corridor, and so then people on either side of that corridor may want to ask for a revaluation based on that decision. It may be moved, but then that relocated corridor would still have to be finalised before people could ask for a revaluation. Or they may just defer it indefinitely, and again, people could ask for a revaluation on that basis as well. There's, look,
redistribute the rates.
I'll come to that question if I can finish. Can I finish answering this question?
We lost $10.9 million last year, and you're earning a good dollar, about $300,000, and you guys redistributed the rates. And we've got people in Oakville who went from $2,500 to $10,000. If you didn't redistribute the rates, we would be cranky.
So
yes, our land values changed, but you can redistribute the rates. It's within your bailiwick, and that's what the base rate calculation is for, and you changed it.
Okay, so can I finish answering the question I was answering, and then I'll come to that one, okay? So the issue is that we rely on the state government to do that revaluation. That influences the rate value that we use, the land value that we use for calculating rates. So that's the options that we've got at the moment. Okay, so the question is the rating regime that's been adopted by council. So that's so that's correct. Last year, council made a decision to change the rating approach. So, when are we going on to the rates? Is it next?
The rest of the questions aren't dealing with rates, so we'll probably deal with them now.
Well, if there are no more questions about the corridor, I'll move straight on to the rates. Are there any more questions about the corridor?
Yes.
Yep.
I asked some questions there.
Yep.
I'd like an answer, please.
So your name is? Judy Ryan. Yeah. Okay. So what is Council's long-term vision for Oakville and Maraylya? Okay, so we're waiting. The question is, what is Council's... Yep, okay then. Being the M9 blue zone, the M9 is always foremost on my thoughts. According to the Statement of Environmental Effects, after the corridor is gazetted and the Department of Planning and Environment intend considering north of the Vineyard Precinct, i.e. Oakville and Maraylya, for rezoning to industrial. Does this fit with Council's long-term plans, or will Council be strongly objecting to such a proposal? According to Infrastructure Australia, they are advocating for early acquisition of properties along the corridor. This will ghetto the whole area and reduce the property areas of the surrounding streets. What can Council do to reduce this effect? I understand the corridor isn't gazetted yet. This is a hypothetical question, but a big probability. So the council position is at this stage not about industrial land next to the vineyard. Can we go back to that previous slide that's got the corridor? So we've got the Vineyard Precinct Stage 1 in the bottom right-hand corner, and then we've got the orbital alignment that's being proposed, the corridor that's being proposed. That land in there, relative to other land in Hawkesbury and other land in outer northwestern Sydney, has pretty good access to public transport. So, as I said earlier, one of our primary considerations is about locating housing near public transport. So, there would be a strong case to consider some housing going in that area if something was going to happen in terms of a future urban zone. Now, you do need local employment opportunities, and we've got some other opportunities for that as well. One of them is up near the RAF base and Western Sydney University. So we're certainly looking at local employment opportunities as well. And again, that's on the railway line as well. So it could well be that we can get a bit of a win-win here. If there's going to be any change in land use zonings, it may well be that we would suggest to the Department of Planning that there could be some residential and some employment land. But I don't think anyone has got a position where this is all going to be zoned industrial or something like that. We haven't got that far down the track in our thinking, but I just want you to know we're trying to get housing and jobs close to public transport. So that's what we'll be thinking about as we move forward.
Sorry, one last question on the corridor. Knowing where it stops at the moment, am I right that some form of line of computers trying to work out the most cost-effective way to get it from here across the Hawkesbury River, given the span of the river, the height of all the undulations? Is that probably what's driving to work out where this next corridor goes? Is just the cost of where it runs?
I suspect that could be a consideration. I suspect that could be so the question is there some rationale behind the corridor terminating at Maraylya? And the observation was, is it because the government is still working out exactly where they're going to cross the Hawkesbury River? There could be some relevance of that observation. However, you know, a couple of 100 metres pointing, you know, in a different direction can make a huge difference. So it could well be that it's only to that point that there's some certainty about where it's going to be, and beyond that, it could move all over the place. So I think, though, it comes down to what's the nature of the freight role and transport role that this line is going to fulfil, because that's going to determine gradients and it's going to determine the arc of any turns and things like that. So, you know, that's why we're suggesting we need to know more about the role so that we can use that information to inform the design. And my preference is that we would have liked a bit more detail rather than just stopping where it is at the moment. Yes?
You mentioned earlier about the fact that the Hillshire has influence on zoning. What's the council doing about getting more influence over their own zoning, changes to their own zoning, instead of letting it just go to the state hands, because the state is not looking after the Hawkesbury?
So I didn't say that Hills had more influence. I said that they've got the authority to do some planning in some areas.
So what
and there are
doing about getting their
well,
own authority to do planning in areas?
so the state government 10 years ago made a decision to identify the northwest and southwest growth areas. So areas down through Camden, Liverpool, Fairfield, Penrith, as well as areas up this end, are all under the jurisdiction of the state government. They're rolling out the planning decisions in all of those local government areas. We're part of a group of councils that are looking to try and develop a partnership with the state government, and we're in the process of doing that at the moment, where we hope we do get more authority. So we're working with Wallandilly, Blue Mountains, Penrith, Fairfield, Liverpool, Camden, Campbelltown and ourselves to try and get the government to agree on a partnership going forward. And we're hopeful that that will give us more authority in the process. So we're not working on it by ourselves, we're working on it with those other councils that are currently home to about 1 million people. We figure that that will give us more bargaining power as part of this process.
Right, but what we as the people who live on this side of the river want you to do is to pay attention to our side of the river as well, and not just development across the river. Because we're not hearing, as people from Maraylya and Oakville, that you're looking out for us as development.
So we're not looking at any development on the other side of the river. The other side of the river is even further away from public transport. So what I said earlier was we're focusing on getting housing outcomes and employment outcomes near public transport. That to us makes the most sense. That's what we're working on at the moment.
Yes, so back to the M9, the others. So it sounds like council's submission put up a good case as to why it shouldn't be where it is. So thank you on behalf of the members. But given the lack of response to others who have contacted the Transport, Roads and Maritime Services, what is council going to do in terms of actively following up the council submission to get a response?
So the question is, what more is council doing in relation to advocating for local residents and itself in terms of the corridor? So we've certainly...
to get a response.
Yep. So we've certainly followed up, and as I said earlier, we want to get the names of the other people here tonight and we'll follow up from them. And our ideal is to make sure that people start getting contacted sooner rather than later and start getting some of the meetings that need to happen so that it gives people the confidence that things are happening. That's what we'd want to do. Yes?
Just to take you back to that last point before the last point, you say there's no development happening on the north side. Are they mushrooms coming up North Richmond, not housing estates?
So in terms of North Richmond, so you're talking about the Red Bank development. So that was something that was approved a number of years ago. I'm talking about the current council is not looking at any further residential development west of the river. We've already got a fundamental problem with getting vehicles across the Hawkesbury River. It's, bumper to bumper if you're trying to move there in the afternoon or the morning. There's been a recent announcement of a business case to look at that linkage across the river, but we need a serious crossing of the Hawkesbury River that's above the relevant flood level so that people have got access to it and across the river all the time. but again, it's not a tool to generate more development because it's so far away from public transport. It's more a flood prevention and emergency management thing than anything else.
Where are they looking for subdivision? One on this side, you don't have the flood problem, you don't have the fire problem, there'll be evacuation problem.
So the question is, where is subdivision being considered? So as I mentioned here, when the corridor is finalised, the Department of Planning will look at that next stage of subdivision, and we're waiting for that corridor to be finalised.
How did it happen in North Richmond then?
That was a decision that was made some years ago by a previous council. I wasn't here at the time.
Doesn't have the authority.
We don't have the authority to carry out the planning in the release areas. So as I said earlier, there are areas between Camden and Campbelltown and Liverpool right up to Hawkesbury where the state government 10 years ago took that planning authority over, and all those councils are similarly affected. Sorry?
Are those areas that have been taken over by the state government, Oakville and Maraylya?
They're included in those areas, yes.
So North Richmond clearly wasn't?
That's correct. Yes.
So Peter, if you wish to move the suburbs of Oakville and Maraylya into the Hills Council, we'll have to go up in here tomorrow.
No, because you won't move out of the release area. You've got to really listen, okay? The state government have identified this area as a release area. It doesn't matter what local government area you're in. It won't change. And there are areas in a whole range of councils that are similarly affected. No one's picking on Oakville and Maraylya. That's just the reality of it.
Why was the Hills Council supporting the Oakville area and parts of Maraylya a year or so ago?
I have no idea. I didn't even know that was happening.
The council advised us not to go with the Hills Council because we'd upset our lifestyle.
I think you might be talking about local government amalgamations. Okay, so there was a proposal to amalgamate the Hills Shire and the Hawkesbury City Council. And the state government appointed an independent assessor to look at that, and the independent state government assessor determined that that amalgamation should not proceed.
There was a separate proposal by the Hills Council to take Oakville back into their area because that was part of their area many years ago.
I don't know anything about that. Yes?
Maraylya is actually half on the Hawkesbury side and half on the Hill side. On the Hill side, there's actually multiple developments allowed. So why is it not on the Hawkesbury side? If it's not a council thing, then why is Maraylya as a whole suburb not affected the same?
Because the local government boundary cuts through the middle of Maraylya, and part of it is in the Hills Shire and part of it is in Hawkesbury. Now, this area here has been identified by the state government 10 years ago as being the northwest growth sector. They've taken responsibility for the planning of this area. That was a decision that was made totally independently of council.
And independent of the people that live here too, by the sounds of it.
And that could well be the case. I don't know. I wasn't here at the time. Yes?
So what you're saying is that the Hawken Hill side of Maraylya is not in the state planning council.
I don't know if that's...
The road sector that you've identified is only in the Hawkesbury side.
So there are I can't tell you if the Hills side of the road, if the portion of Maraylya that's on the Hills side of Boundary Road, I can't tell you if that's in the growth corridor off the top of my head. I really can't. But I can tell you there are areas of the Hills Shire that are in the growth corridor, as there are areas of Blacktown, Penrith. So it is an area, and again, we'll put the link up on our website and you can see that. But it was a decision that was made and they've continued on with that. Okay, so the next question we're going to move on to is rates. So, have we got some questions before
We
Emma
don't
gets
have
up?
many questions online. We just have a question the gentleman asked.
I'm not going to answer questions about rates. Can everyone hear me? Can everyone hear me at the back? Yes, okay. So there was a question about rates a little bit earlier, and it was about the fact that council changed the rating structure for last year and whether that had a big impact on the increase in rates. So what happened last year, as we've explained when we came out last year, the total local government area, the land value of the total area, increased from 8.6 billion in 15-16 to 12.2 million. So that's an increase of 42% across the whole area. In terms of the rates income, it went from 30 million to 31 million, which just reflects the normal increase that we get allowed from year to year. So there was 2 years' worth of what we call the rate peg, 2.4 and 1.5. And there was 1% from general overall growth. So even though there was the 42% increase in land value, that doesn't give council additional rates income. So that's the first clarification. So, but what does happen...
But that doesn't increase their costs in running either.
What do you mean, sorry?
Well, if the underlying land value's gone from 8.6 to 12.2, I mean, my land value's gone from 600 to 2 million, but the cost of running the property hasn't increased.
Yep. So I suppose when a land revaluation occurs in the local government area, what happens is that the relative values of properties will change. So some areas will go up more in value than others, and that will influence how the rates will move. So what happened in the last revaluation, the average increase that happened across the area by suburb was 40%.
Not true.
However,
Not right.
can I please explain before I get questions? Let's get the facts first, okay? So the average, it's an average across all the local government area. 23,000 properties was 40%. Most suburbs experience an increase in land value. Some suburbs as high as 206%. That was Vineyard. So as a suburb, Vineyard went up 206% compared to the average of 40%. Land value increases in respect of individual properties varied from 1% to as high as 347%. Can I finish explaining this and I'll take your question? Because before I answer questions...
You're answering my question and you're not answering it. It was a pretty straightforward question. Peter said, with the changes with the corridor, will you consider revaluing? And Peter said, yes, the state government, there could be a case to revalue.
Yes.
And I said that during 2017, the council redistributed the rates. And would you consider redistributing it back? Because in 2013-14, the rural residents in this district, 16% of the population were paying 48% of the rates. And they changed it to make it fair. And you have created the most unfair rates distribution in the history of Hawkesbury. We've got a farming council. You made an operating loss of $10.9 million. I read the IPART submission you guys put in, and and you said you've modelled rates to keep the urban areas to an increase of $90, but you've let the areas like Oakville go up by $10,000. And we've got pensioners paying $12,500 since you got the 31.29% increase. So people are losing their homes, and it's going to go up every year.
Can I answer the question? I get the gist. I get the gist of what you're saying.
What I ask is, will you consider the rates redistribution? It is very unfair, and you should put it back to what it was before.
Okay. So just a couple of points. So way back in 2012, 2013, we had a 50% base amount, because that's the point that has been argued over the last few months. So when that was put in place, there was a redistribution of rates back then. So we had properties in more urban areas, such as Blythe Park, Richmond. They got increases of around $100. So it was, it was not a big increase. At the same time that happened, properties in the rural, what we consider as a rural residential subcategory, so properties around here, they had decreases of around an average of $600. They had those decreases in those rates from between 2012 2013 till the latest restructure. So that decrease in average about $600 in the rates. $600 per year. Okay. So anyone that wants to dispute that can send, happy to get your property details, and I'll respond directly to you.
It's gone up 380%.
Can just, I'm just explaining where the rates restructure, where it came from, and the impact along the time. So that's what happens in 2012-13, and there was $600 decrease in the rate, which was maintained as a decrease for those properties for about whatever the is that. So what discount? What?
We were paying double rates. That's why, and we weren't getting services.
I'm just explaining the history, because what I'm saying is the facts. I know it as well. So those decreases have happened. So what council, the new council wanted to do is to relook at all that and see whether they could change that. The decision that came out of that was that there would be a further redistribution, and the way where we could, so the view of the council was they wanted to get as close as possible to where we were before that first restructure happened. So to do that, we've done a number of workshops with the council, and the midpoint where we could return those suburbs that had those increases back to where they were was to reduce the base amount to 30%. So then what happened at the same time in 2016, the fire emergency levy was coming in from the state government. To do that, the state government brought the land revaluation forward 1 year. Okay, so the land revaluation wouldn't have happened last year if the FESL wasn't going to come in. So whilst the state government withdrew that levy, the land values that were determined stayed. The land valued, not quite sure, I'm here, attended the workshop, the information session that we organised last year with the Valuer General. So council does not determine the land values, the Valuer General does, and what they use is sales data. So not disputing whether that's the right way to do it or not, but that's what we have to work with. We have no choice but to use land values. So at the same time the restructure happened, the land values happened. The land values change that happened out here was quite abnormal, if you like it wasn't something that we had seen before in the Hawkesbury. So there's no dispute of that.
Before you did the rates change.
Yeah, and all that reporting went to council, and the decision was made.
You did
So
all the modelling, knowing the rates,
yeah,
knowing the land valuations.
Yeah.
Knowing that we had no rights, we don't have the same rights as residential people. That's not fair. That's wrong.
Can I just say you're not answering the question? You're still not answering it. That's
Can you repeat the question? I'll try again.
Yes. So the question is, Peter talked about having rates changes, and Peter talked about land valuation, and I asked a specific question. You restructured and you redistributed the rates. Will you consider changing it back.
Yeah.
We're
So
distributing it back.
yes. So since we came out with this,
Say that the Local Government Act specifically states that rates are paid for services and they should be evenly distributed across all the residents, irrespective of what services they get. And rural residents get no services other than water and rubbish, but we are paying most of the rates.
So let's. If we're going to quote the Local Government Act, we'll quote the Local Government Act, okay? Bottom line is, your rate is based on your access to services. If you've got... I'm happy to have the debate, but let's deal with the facts, okay? You want to introduce the Local Government Act. The Local Government Act levies rates based on access to services. You only have to have access to it. You don't have to use them. So the Local Government Act also says that the valuer general's valuation determines the rate in the dollar and the rates. So all of these matters are determined by legislation. That's state government legislation that's outside of our control. So when we deal with the subcategories, council has made a decision on the subcategories. They have had a further workshop since that, and they've determined that they're comfortable with the way things are at the moment. I can't.
You've buggered it. The council's broken. You've lost $10.9 million.
And we are bailing you out. How much are you on a year?
So, again, the 10.9 million, okay, is a convenient use of statistics. So, at the moment, we don't generate enough income to run our operations and, hang on, run it.
Well, you shouldn't be there, you should be in business. And you spent $20 million on wages. So if you haven't got enough money, save $100 off.
Do you want to answer? Do you want me to answer the question?
It's our money, please. It's our money.
Do you want me to answer the question?
I wish you would.
Okay, so we don't, at the moment, we don't have enough money to run the operation and put all the money we need to put into the management of our assets, our roads, our buildings and things like that. Okay, so you also understand that situation is as a result of rate pegging, where we are forced to maintain our rates at a level set by the state government. So sometimes the CPI, Consumer Price Index, will change by 2.5% or 3%, and we'll be told to keep your rates at 1.9%. So we're getting further behind every time. Now look, listen.
I just asked a question 20 minutes ago on whether you would consider...
I answered that. I did. No. Okay, I've told you we've had a rate workshop, and well, I tell you the answer. So that's the answer. Now, as
community consultation, Peter.
so,
We're telling you what we want.
this is question and answer. Okay, you're asking the questions, we're giving the answers.
89% of the people in the Hawkesbury voted against your 31% increase, but you went ahead with it anyway. Why?
So again,
Why did you go against the wishes of the people?
So again, the most reliable statistical tool was the telephone survey, and that wasn't that score. No. So if we can continue on now, I just want to show you some other information. Can we get the slide up that shows the change over time? Oh, yeah. Okay, so again, let's...
You're not fair thinking.
My kids that are now
were born. You know, like, so we're all these people have got to an age where half of them are pensioners, and our rates are just beyond, what, have we got to go and move? And another question, and another thought something I'd like to know is, if we lived in Rose Bay, on a beautiful harbour property, what's their rates? I bet they don't pay between $2,000 and $4,000 in rates. And their land has to be worth more than ours.
Okay.
And with everybody walking out, I don't necessarily think that's the answer. You've got to have a think about this.
So I'll answer a couple of those questions. So the first thing is, at a council that I've previously worked at that had properties on the harbour front, their rates were in the order of $12,000 to $15,000 per annum. So that's a genuine fact. I'm just going to finish answering those questions and I'll come to you next, okay? No, I'll answer your question, that's fine.
So that rate comparison, did that jump up from 1,000 one year to 12,000 the next, or?
It would have escalated over a period of time.
Or
yep.
A longer period of time?
Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily. We're talking about harbour frontage blocks that have escalated dramatically in the last 10 years.
If I put my land value into the Balcombe Hills calculator for my rates, it works out at $1,700 a year compared to $4,000 in Hawkesbury.
So it's
pay a premium to live in Hawkesbury.
So
it's not that much.
It's not a straight transfer like that. You can't just insert your land value into the hills. They've got a whole lot of different rate regimes, and it's not that good. Now, can I just? There's a person down here who's been waiting to ask a question all night. I've promised her I'm going to ask that next. Yes.
I've lived out here for 30 years, and you say that we get rated on our access to services. In 30 years, what Maraylya has received from the council is that playground on that park there. It was originally put under the trees, had to be moved. It still doesn't even have bloody shade over it. 30 years we have put up with just a garbage service because we love living here. It's not fair. Look at your little book. Maraylya isn't in last year's anything. Nothing in the village.
So,
and I'm happy with that. But leave us alone. Let us live our lives out here. I'm happy with just a garbage service. And we'll look after the kids ourselves. But to rate us out on services, we have one bus in the morning and one bus in the afternoon.
So as I was saying earlier, it is based on you having access to the services. So it is the library, it's the swimming pool, it's all manner of things. Now, in addition to those things, there's this hall, there's other things that we provide, ovals, playing fields. The other thing though is that the rates are also determined by the land value. That's the reality. So we've got an example up here of these are real life examples, okay, where we've looked at land values over time and rate increases over time, okay? So if we just go through it, property 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 down along the side here. Can everyone see that? Yeah. So property 1 in 2003 and 4 was the land value was $290,000. If you used CPI and adjusted that $290,000 at the CPI rate up to 17-18, $290,000 is $408,000. But the actual land value in 17-18 was not 408, it was 734,000. So land values in this area are increasing significantly faster than CPI. So there's a significant increase there. And then if you look at your overall increase between the two periods, it's 153%. Rates went up by 21.8%. So you get the same services throughout. So these are just a series of examples. So if we go to the bottom one, property 5. In 2003 and 4, it was worth 594,000. CPI adjusted up to 17-18, that would have been 836,000. It was actually valued by the Valuer General at 3.2 million. So that's an increase of 440%. And the rates went up by 117%. So the rates are not increasing at anywhere near the rate that land values are increasing. So that demonstrates to a degree that the system does try to be equitable. And the other thing that council tries to do is to get equity across all the different suburbs and all the different conditions that exist across the local government area. It's not a perfect thing, but it just is another way of looking at it, and it does demonstrate that it is in some ways more equitable than perhaps people think. Yes.
The cost of, first question, the cost of providing the services, is that going up at the in hundreds of percentage points?
The cost of providing services falls within the rate cap. So that's been capped by the state government. So our rates over that period.
So I guess the ultimate point is that the person whose land's gone up 404%, it's still one property.
That's right.
So the valuation's based on the 36 families that are going to be in there sometime in the future when it's developed. But until that time, it's still one family, it's still one property.
The valuation is based on the value that people are prepared to pay
I get
for
all
it.
that, but it's still one property that's now paying multiples of times of what they were paying 2 years ago for the same thing.
And that's the way the rating system works.
If you choose to go with it that way.
But again, we've got some other examples here that even...
But that's it's just coming out of people's pockets. Like, there's
That-
nothing extra coming into fund.
So that's the way the system works. And the other thing that we've done is we've also reviewed all our support policies. So if people are suffering from hardship or people want to defer rates, we've got policies to accommodate that as well. So we haven't just put up the rates, we've also put in mechanisms to assist people if they are suffering from hardship or they want to defer the payment of those rates.
That lady with the blue gloves had enough rain.
Yep.
Surely the land values have been influenced by all the subdivision down here and the big prices that have been paid for where those developers have gone, and it's crossed Boundary Road and affecting the people on this side where we can't subdivide.
So I would agree that I would suspect people are buying into this area on the belief that this area may be rezoned in the future. But that's speculation, and that happens all across Sydney.
You can't sell in Maraylya now.
Again, that could be because of the corridor. So again, that's got nothing to do with the council.
No, but it does have something to do with our land values.
And as I said, when the corridor decision is finalised, there may be scope for you to request a review of your value. That's quite possible. But again, that'll be a decision of the state government, not of the council.
We understand the impact that the Valuer General has on the rates, but just going back to the base rate, so it's now 30% rather than 50%. Is that correct? Base rate valuation.
I'm going to hand Emma back to deal with these questions.
It's going to come back to you shortly, so don't go too far.
Yes, the base amount is 30% now.
So that was changed in 2015, is that what you said?
No, so just most recently, for the 17-18 year, for the current financial year. Yeah.
So that was a decision made by the councillors? Who made that decision? Who voted for that?
Yeah, so it's a council decision, and it was essentially to revert
So
revert the structure
can we
back
hear
into
from the councillors who voted for that to happen? Can we please hear why they chose to go from 50% base rate to 30%? Can they please explain their decision to this room?
So the purpose of tonight is not that. Okay, the purpose of tonight is actually to talk about what we're going to do next year and last year, but we're having this question and answer session. So the decision was made by council. As Emma said, that was a decision that was made as part of the lead up to an election. That was a historical, political issue, and that's what's happened.
Okay, but there's some
Every
councillors
question
here.
asked tonight, you don't have the power to answer or able to do anything about anyway.
There's some councillors here that didn't vote for it, and some that did.
That's
We wanna
probably
know-
true.
Okay, so we want to know who did, so that we can remove them in the next election.
So I think it's on the public record who voted what way. I don't think it's a difficult thing to find out.
Why don't they want to talk?
Because I'm telling you, we're going to answer Q&A. So that's what we're dealing with. So, next one.
Whereabouts is the council swimming pool?
There's one at South Windsor and there's one at Richmond.
And now that we've had our rates, do we get access to those for free?
No, you pay the same as everyone else. That's right.
So we pay more rates, we get to use the services, but we have to pay to use the services.
The same as everyone else. That's right. Everyone pays rates. Everyone pays to use the services. The rates are set by the state government based on your land value.
And the base rate.
And the base rate. Yep.
And there is no public transport for me to get from my place to Richmond to use the road, so I can't use it anyway.
No, and that was probably the case when you moved here. I'm just saying, some things don't change. Some things don't change.
Or are you going to put one in Oakville?
What's that?
A swimming pool?
The Section 94 plan that's just come off exhibition, and how widely did we notify the Section 94 plan? So certainly some residents were notified of the Section 94 plan, and the Section 94 plan has got a table of services and facilities and infrastructure in it. And I think we've had, do you know how many submissions? We've had 4 submissions. So again, I would encourage people to actively participate in the process.
Where do we get the process on the website?
Yep.
The Section 94, the Section 94 plan wasn't about broader council services, it was about the roads and the cost of everything just for the development area.
It's the roads, it's the drainage, it's the community facilities, the parks, the open space, all of that.
Specifically in that area, not outside of it.
No, but people outside that area can use those parks and that open space and those facilities.
But there was definitely no pools.
No pools. Once I get older and I need hydrotherapy.
Up the back.
I can't get there on transport, and I can't use it because I can't afford to pay for it because of my rates.
And why is it that we've got dangerous trees on Saunders Road? I rang the council up and they said, yes, they are dangerous, but we've got no money to take them to.
So you're lucky you got an answer.
Well,
They're dangerous to pedestrians and for cars.
Okay, so can you see me after the session here?
Well, I'm not
And-
going to see, you just drive up the road yourself. You've got people working the council, but tree, and know about trees. Go up there and have a look yourself.
I will, but I'd like to be able to then tell you the outcome of that. So,
My address, I'm driving down the shoulder. I went right across my road.
I beg your pardon? Sorry?
You come out, pick me up, and I'll show you.
Okay, can you stay? I'll arrange to pick you up and we'll go and look at the tree. Okay? Good.
Trees.
Trees. We'll go and look at the trees. Excellent.
Whitmore Road, once I complained about already writing twice, and still yet have not got a written response other than the automated response.
Okay, I'll get back to you in a minute. Next question.
For a tree to be cut down in front of my house because it nearly fell on my kids' heads at the bus stop, but that's all right.
Okay, I'll come to there as well, okay? Yep, up the back.
Just on the, calls for people saying you should have subcategories in it. Is it illegal under the local government act for the council to actually set up subcategories purely on the basis of property value, so that they can distribute rates on the basis purely of property value?
It's not one of the options. Land value is not one of the options to create a subcategory.
My understanding from the council rating manual, whatever the 100-word name is, that it's actually illegal for the council to create subcategories on the basis of land value. So you just can't we're going to create a thing here and just distribute 5% of it when they own 40% of the value. That's actually illegal.
Yeah, so the Act doesn't tell you what's illegal, it just says what you can do. So distributing the rates, creating a subcategory based on land value is not one of the options that you can use for that purpose. So you
What
cannot
about
do
if
it.
there was a freeway going through it or easement?
So there's a question up there somewhere, but I can't see a hand and I don't know who asked for it. Yep.
Rural rates are cheaper than residential rates, is that right?
No, so there is 3 main rating categories. You're either residential, a business or a farmland. So just because you're rural, it doesn't mean that you're farmland. So there are criteria again in the Act which determine whether you can be categorized as farmland. So just in summary, essentially if you are carrying out any farming activity, and there's all types of things, so growing things, animals, at a certain scale, then you can apply for a farmland rate, which is cheaper.
I have to submit a return every year to the Rural Lands Board, telling them how many stock I have on my property.
Yeah. Have you applied to council for farmland?
No.
Try that and we'll see what we can do. If you meet the criteria of the Act, you'll be eligible, but you have to apply because we don't know what people are doing with their land.
Okay, just so you'll see us afterwards and we'll follow it up. Okay, yes.
In our area of Maraylya where our rate notices are now rural residential, because we're not residential, how are we rural residential if we can't be zoned as residential?
Okay, so as I said earlier, there is 3 rating categories: residential, business or farmland. Within the residential, you can create subcategories, but there's very strict criteria. One of those categories is rural residential, which is what we had before. The Act defines that by area, not by location. So when we had that subcategory in our rating structure, we had, for example, rural residential properties in the middle of South Windsor. At the same time, we had residential properties out at St Albans. So rural residential is not where you are or access to services, it's defined by size. So because of that and because of the problems that created, and not many councils used for that reason, that is why that subcategory was eliminated. So essentially what's happened is that if you fell within that land size, regardless of where you are, you would be rated the same as anyone else. So it's nothing to do with access to services. I cannot emphasize that enough. It's defined by size.
From rural to rural residential when my block is the same
Yeah,
size?
so as part of when the council reviewed the rating structure, all those things were looked at. So the base amount was looked at and also the rural residential. And what was found, for example, there was issues with farmland as well as compared to rural residential. So because it's defined by size rather than location, it did not reflect, I suppose, fairness, because you could have someone as rural residential, say in the middle of South Windsor, which is next to services, and someone paying residential, like at Bowen Mountain, for example. So that whole suburb, for example, of Bowen Mountain was where people had increases when we did the first rating restructure in 2012, because they're on residential blocks, so they're smaller blocks, but they could be sitting next to properties that, because they're bigger blocks, they were rural and therefore paying higher rates. So we had situations, properties next door to each other, one rural residential, one residential. One got a discount, the other one got an increase. So that's what using that rural residential subcategory created, and that is why we are not using it. And not many councils use it for that reason. Like, if the Act is going to have something to reflect access to services, that's not the way to do it. Your subcategory was rural residential, which is part of residential. What we did in the last review, we said, doesn't matter what your land area is, if you're not business or farmland, you're residential, and everybody pays the same.
But basically, because
based
of
on
the
land
size of the
value.
land, we're paying more, like for instance in Blythe.
Because of the value of the land.
But it basically works out in size.
Not necessarily. It's the value of the land. It's nothing to do with size or where you are, it's the land value. The Act is fairly straightforward. The Act is fairly straightforward, doesn't matter where you are.
So
Land
if you look
value.
at Blythe Park, for instance, say we're looking at size, you've
you've got like how many blocks of land on half an acre, right? But you're expecting one family to cover the rates on a 5 acre block. Well, you've got 20 families doing it like that. It's not a fair rating system.
Well, the rates are not distributed.
Most
Sorry.
of the Hawkesbury is rural.
We have actually, as part of the workshops that Peter spoke about earlier, we looked at many different ways how you could hypothetically distribute rates, because we were saying land value, people are saying land value is not fair. So we looked at number of people per suburbs, we looked at the area of each suburb. So for example, if you look at Blythe Park as an area, as a total area of the suburb, it's quite small, but very densely populated. So the amount of rates we collect from Blythe Park is quite huge when compared to the area. So I suppose depending how you look at things, you know,
The burden on individual families is more equally distributed.
No, the burden is based on land value. So if you're in Blythe Park and you've got a property valued at 2 million, you're going to pay the same as if you were in Oakville. It's land. It's not area based. It's land value based.
But our valuations have gone up because of what's being developed around us. But we can't. It doesn't.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
The value is by selling your property.
I appreciate that the values in Oakville have gone up quite significantly, and that's what's caused the spike in the rates. But if a property was in Blythe Park, just by way of an example, and the increase in rates, the increase in land value was the same as Oakville. So say a property valued at 600,000, and let's say it went up to 1.9 million. Let's say that was in Blythe Park. Same property in Oakville, same two properties will have the same increase in rates. Doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter. It's land values.
Are the rates increasing next year as well?
So the IPART approved rating increase is to increase the rates by 9.5% per annum, including the rate cap. So if the government set the rate cap at 2.5%, we would add another 7 on top of that. If the government set the rate cap at 1.5%, we would add another 8% on top of that. So that's for 3 years, and we've again got a plan to spend about 70% of that income on roads, either sealing roads that are currently gravel or resealing roads that need to be upgraded. And so come to that. So your rates went up this year by depends on where you are, but they went up because of the change in land value.
And then 30% again, and then 30%
No,
again.
no.
30% over 3 years.
That's right. Yep.
And at the end of that 3 years, that special variation finishes?
That's right. Yep.
So that will go down after
No, it stays at that level. Any other questions on rates? Okay. The next question, Joseph.
We have 3 more questions that we received online, so we can just go through those, if that's all right. I'll just read that out. So the question was from Maria from Maraylya. Just wondering if an application has been submitted to the state government to approve detached dwellings in Maraylya. If not, will it be considered in future years? And there was also a little bit about thanking us for slashing some grass on the side of a national park, but I won't go into that. I'll just Andrew.
They won't have all the road markers.
Thanks, Joseph. Currently, the Hawkesbury local environmental plan does not permit dual occupancy detached within rural zones. Council has previously attempted on 2 separate occasions to amend the local environmental plan to make detached dual occupancies permissible, but on both occasions has been unsuccessful in obtaining approval from the New South Wales State Government. The principal reason for this has been due to concerns of the New South Wales State Government in respect of flood risk within the Hawkesbury and Nepean Valley, and more particularly the need to address regional flood evacuation issues. While Council is not currently considering a further application to the State Government on an LGA-wide basis, we are doing work in terms of Maraylya and Oakville in terms of looking at flood risk and evacuation capacity in order to consider a potential future amendment to the LEP to permit detached dual occupancies for land that the state government won't have an issue in. So that obviously involves talking to a number of state agencies, Infrastructure New South Wales, SES and the Office of Environment and Heritage, and that's what we're moving towards. Yeah.
How long that process takes?
Well, obviously those discussions, it is a large issue in terms of the regional flood evacuation issue, so I can't give it a definitive time frame, but we are working towards that.
It was mentioned 12 months ago that you were going to put an application to the state government for Maraylya and Oakville, so that was 12 months ago. You're saying now that you're not sure, so what happened 12 months ago to today? What did you do so far?
It wasn't 12 months ago. It was towards the end of last year. I haven't got the exact date. Councillor Reynolds moved the resolution. He's here. Peter, do you know when you moved that resolution?
It was this meeting.
I know. We'll get the date. I don't think it was anyhow. I'm probably nitpicking. I thought it was towards the end of the year, but that aside. So the state government have, in May, June last year, they released a document that determined how the Hawkesbury Nepean catchment was going to be managed to protect the community from flooding. Now, in adopting that strategy, what they did was move from the normal flood management regime to a different regime. So normally we all have to build a house above the 1 in 100 year flood level. So they've got a level and it says on average, once every 100 years the flood waters will get to this level. So the standard practice has been to work to that 1 in 100 year level. But the Hawkesbury Nepean is regarded by, if you go online and do a search, dangerous floodplains in Australia, the Hawkesbury Nepean will come up in the top 1 or 2. And the reason is because there's a tightening of the river valley down near Ebenezer, and in a big flood, the whole valley fills up like a bathtub. We haven't had a flood like that for some years, but if you go to the museum at Windsor, you can look back historically and you'll see that there are times when there are no floods for extended periods of time, and then other times they're happening every year or two. Now, the biggest flood on record is the 1867 flood, and that was above the 1 in 100 year level. What the government have adopted at the moment is a level called the PMF, the probable maximum flood. And what that tries to work out is, in the absolute worst case scenario, how high could floodwaters go, how quickly would that happen, and how do we get people out of the way as soon as possible. So Andrew's doing work, but he's also doing work on that flood strategy, because Hawkesbury as well as Penrith at the moment have had basically a restraint placed on us increasing the density of any land in or near the floodplain until that PMF level is resolved. So we've engaged consultants to work with us. They're preparing strategies and arguments that we're going to take to the state government. Once we've got an agreed position in relation to that, Andrew's going to press on with the dual occupancy provisions. But if we just put it in now, nothing would happen. It would just sit on the back burner. So we are trying to do some good work so that we can justify taking the dual occupancy provision to the state government. It's a long answer, but that's the total answer.
I can understand there are flood affected areas, but when you're looking at Maraylya and Oakville, they are not flood affected. My understanding was a submission was going to be put in for Oakville and Maraylya because they aren't flood affected.
So parts of Oakville are flood affected. So down near Windsor Road, there are areas that are flood affected. And again, the government want to deal with that issue. They won't just let it do a little spot rezoning here and there. They want a comprehensive solution, and that's what we're trying to work to. And we've done quite a lot of work, and there'll be a report going to council before the end of the year on how we're going to try and argue this. So again, I'm happy to take the details and let you know when that report's going to council. Yes?
Can I just ask the new subdivisions that council approved at Pitt Town then?
Yeah,
There's a lot of area of Pitt Town that will go underwater.
So those...
So why did council approve and let those subdivisions go through?
Okay, so those subdivisions were approved by Frank Sartor. So he approved those. He took the decision out of council's hand and he approved them.
So now we've got to foot the bill of infrastructure,
Yes.
mitigation,
So
all
what?
the reports
Yep.
you have to do. That's where all the money's going there.
So one of the
money is going towards that. For a lot of us sitting here tonight, we are not flood affected.
So-
We live on the fringes of a flood affected area, but a lot of our land is not flood affected, and we do have a direct route out of Maraylya and Oakville, out through Terry Road. Okay, now there's going to be a lot of water going, not sure where at the moment because of all the new subdivisions that they put in Box Hill and the back of Rousser and all that, which has changed all of that. But they've let all those houses go in and they're putting them in by the dozens every day. So, you know, for Hawkesbury Council now, you're talking about all these reports, like it's thousands of dollars that it's going to be, we'll have to find for consultation with this department, that department, you know, for how long do we have to wait then before they let us know what we're allowed to do in our area here that we aren't flood affected.
So we've got two options. We can just sit back and wait for the state government to make a decision, or we can try and manage the situation. So what Andrew's been doing, he's initiated that flood study so that we've got a strong argument to take to the state government. Now, that we think that's in keeping with the spirit and the intent of the council resolution. So that's what we've been doing. Now, we had to do that anyhow because we were doing it for Windsor and for Richmond and other areas of the local government area. So we don't figure we're wasting money. We sort of figure that we're actually getting an economy of scale by including Oakville and Maraylya into that work. So I think it's money well spent, and that's what we're doing. The Oakville decision, as I said, that was a decision that was taken out of council's hands, and we're just trying to manage it as best we can based on what we were given. Did I say Oakville? Sorry, Pitt Town, sorry. Okay, the notice of motion was in September last year. Okay.
So sorry, just a bit confused. If I want to submit a DA, I'm under rural rules, but when you want to send me more rates, I'm under residential?
So there are two ways of looking at land. There's a rating way and a town planning way. And you can be zoned, you can be zoned business in a rating, under the rating regime, but then you could be zoned mixed use or something under the town planning arrangements. The two don't talk to each other. They're just different processes for different outcomes. One's for rating and one's for town planning. They're not related in any way. Next question.
So the next question is from Judy Ryan. How can council deter rubbish dumpers from both the area around Brennan's-Dam Road and Commercial Road and also the streets adjacent to Skyville National Park? The area looks like a tip. Also, what can be done to tidy up Brennan's-Dam area that might deter dumpers if it didn't look like a dump site?
Jeff, you're going to do Brennan's Dam?
No, it's a general question. We'll do the whole thing.
Excellent.
The general answer to that is, and not be very polite, as somebody said, shoot them. But yeah, look, this is something that really worries council. We had the other day a whole lot of asbestos material dumped right in the middle of Skyville Road. I think that twice, it was 2 lots. and one in Skyline on another road as well. Cost the council, I think, $18,000 to remove one of those piles of material. So it's something that really exercises our mind. It's right across the metropolitan area, that dumping, and unfortunately both Penrith, Blacktown and Hawkesbury areas is copying that impact. One of the things we are looking at is sharing better intelligence through EPA initiatives and also with other councils about trying to get a process where that sort of material can be tracked. In terms of enforcement and surveillance, that's something that we're going to try and beef up, and we're looking at putting additional compliance staff on and trying to track that and make sure that it doesn't occur. It is very, very difficult to catch people in the act. You might have read the other day, same because he was arrested, he's in jail now, Mr. Dib Hanna, is in serial dumper right across Sydney. He's now in Her Majesty's care, but that's probably the only one I can think of that has actually gone to jail. There's been a number of fines that council officers have issued and clean-up notices, but it's a problem right across the area. Again, we're just going to try and keep on top of it, and we're trying to remove the material as quickly as possible. If you do notice anything untoward, we would encourage you to either contact council or to the EPA hotline. So again, awareness of that. And the other one too is do not accept material onto your properties because you become liable for it. And there's a number of contaminated lands that the poor old landowner has copped. So again, I'll just put that warning out there for people. Don't accept free fill. It's not free.
I'm just going to say you should probably make the hills aware. I've seen several loads of rubbish dumped along Boundary Road, obviously from the new developments. Small builders go and dump sort of rubbish all the way along Boundary Road there. So it's all coming from the hills area, so you should let them know. Their builders in their area are dumping rubbish in the Hawkesbury as well.
We certainly do that. As I said, it's an opportunistic thing, and if somebody can try and save a few dollars by dumping it on the road and have the public purse pick up the cost of picking it up, double handling it and disposing of it, because it does cost us. It doesn't come free for us to take to our landfill either, or to a licensed landfill elsewhere. So those costs are real, and they come against the council budget. So they're things that we're going to meet.
Sorry, Jeff, were you going to say something about Brennan's Dam Road?
Well, I think the question was just about cleaning up Brennan's Dam Road. If there's an area there, we can certainly tidy that up. But that doesn't discourage.
About sealing.
No, I don't think the question was about sealing. I'll come to that. One of the things is obviously, we've cleaned up areas, and I drive along Racecourse Road over in Clarendon, and if we clean that up weekly, and unfortunately all it does means there's another area that somebody can go and dump something there. So cleaning it up doesn't work as clearing. In terms of sealing of Brennan's Dam Road, you saw the part of our reluctance to go and do too much work there is that it may form part of the release area. We have done designs for upgrading of the culverts and the crossings and realigning roads, but we're talking millions of dollars to do that. So we'll come to probably some issues later on in terms of what council prioritises in terms of work, but if I can hold that question till then. But I think probably answered the question on dumping.
Why can't you seal it?
What was the question?
Why can't you seal it?
Council could seal it. It comes down to a question of priorities of where should we be spending the available money. As I indicated, the vineyard release area, stage 2, will potentially impact on that, and that road may or may not exist. We just don't know the planning. It wouldn't be a prudent decision to go and spend several $1 million on culverts, bridges and sealing of that road, and to have it not used in 10 years' time. Gentleman up the back.
You just were mentioning about the dumping of rubbish on Skyville Road. When that actually happened, they had to close the road to clean it up. One of the roads that residents could have used if it was graded would be the dirt section of Midson Road between Skyville Road and the Tart Park. Council contractors have dumped a lot of stuff they've collected off the sides of the road and stockpiled it there. So I think that the council claim it's not their stuff, but we've actually got photographic evidence of council contractors dumping their stuff there. And you can't actually access that road. We drove through it in a 200 series Land Cruiser, just like through on that particular day where you closed the Skywell Road to clean up. I understand why you closed it, but if you could at least grade it and take the big holes out where the water sits probably 2 foot deep, we may actually be able to use it in an evacuation time, like to get out if it was flooded on Skywell Road. We could actually use that road as access to get out. Or potentially fire. You can't get down there, or a fire truck. There's no way you get a truck down there to fight a fire if I can't get my 200 series cruiser through there.
Yeah. That road is legally closed to traffic, as I understand it.
No, it's not. It's a public road, and it is actually, I was told by the council, as an evacuation route, and it is a public road, and it's supposed to be maintained by the council.
I've no dispute that it's a public road. It's whether it's legally open to traffic.
We've got
I'll take it on notice, but my understanding is that it's a legally closed road, whether it's physically closed.
No, it's an evacuation route, and nobody's ever been notified that it's been closed. There's no sign that says it's closed.
Okay, I'll take that on notice. I said that was my understanding. I'll double check that and take a record of it. The area that you talk about, the stockpile along there, if there's anybody dumping along there now, because it's an old stockpile site that was used by council many years ago.
You've never cleaned it up.
We haven't cleaned it up, and it's something we need to address in the long term. But again, that's a very expensive one. Something that, in the past people thought that was the acceptable thing to do to save costs, and it really probably needs to be either removed or either sealed.
So we have one last question that we've received online, and after that I think we might take a break because we've been here for 2 hours. So the final question is, what's Council's plan of action in dealing with the PFAS contamination around Rickaby's Creek? Another concern is that contaminated cattle reached our local markets for consumption.
Thanks, Joseph. So there's a few things to highlight in terms of this matter. Firstly, what is PFAS? PFAS is basically man-made compounds that have been used for, worldwide since the 1950s. There's a wide range of uses for PFAS in common household products, including non-stick cookware, fabric, furniture and carpet stain protection, including Scotchguard, food packaging, paints, and particularly relevant to this question tonight is in firefighting foams that have been used on defence bases across the country, including RAF Base Richmond since the 1970s. The Department of Defence is undertaking an environmental investigation into the nature and extent of the PFAS contamination on and surrounding the RAF Base Richmond, which they've continued to brief Council on throughout the process. A preliminary site investigation was completed in August 2017, which then led to the commencement of a detailed site investigation in October 2017, which also involved a community water use survey. That investigation has involved the sampling of soil, surface water, sediment and groundwater in order to understand how PFAS moves through the environment. That detailed site investigation was released last week at a community walk-in session held in Windsor, and I would encourage people to either view the report or fact sheet that's available from the Department of Defence website, which highlights the outcome of the investigation. I've also got hard copies of the fact sheet here tonight for anyone that's interested. The Department of Defence is also undertaking a human health risk assessment, an ecological risk assessment in response to the detailed site investigation, and that will basically evaluate the potential exposure pathways to people, plants and animals, which will also inform the potential actions to reduce PFAS exposure. Those reports are expected to be completed by the Department of Defence within the next 3 to 4 months, and Council will continue to be briefed about the process and the outcomes in order to ascertain what actions, if any, will be required in the future.